Hello, are you guys able to hear? Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Right, so this talk came in last year when I was working through some of the design principles for the API development. Hello? Is good? Okay. Yeah, so first thing what we need to do is to look at from the designing perspective, and anyone starts building an API. API is something, like if I start talking about API, come on, we all know about API. Talk is over. But important thing is that what's the methodology to use? And I have a book coming out on the methodology for designing the APIs for microservices. And that one, there is a preview, just a talk on NFJS. There is a podcast. The part 1 podcast is out. You can go through that, and the part 2 podcast will be released like sometime this month. So we'll talk about more in what the methodology should be and how it needs to be used. And then we look at some of the design principles regarding how do we build the APIs. And what's the strategy going forward? Okay, so let's start. So web APIs. So web APIs we all know about like the REST APIs which we are building. They are basically URI endpoints, ultimately at the end, and it has some HTTP verbs which you need to use to satisfy the contract. All right, so if you see what's really happening is that you are all building microservices, yes? Like from monolithic app, we are going from monolithic app to the microservices app. And someone asked me a question during the break that, hey, how do I convert my monolithic app to a microservice app? So if you look into this diagram, you can consider the private cloud is kind of a monolithic app for you. And microservices you are building here, and the public cloud is you are interfacing with other applications within what's going on around there. So when you're building the application, you have to worry about the security, that whether the endpoints are secure or not, and you want to make sure that no one can hack your application. So the first strategy, which is really important for you to know, is that API as a product. So this is being adopted by the industry right now. You need to consider API as a product, not just as a side-on to your application which you're trying to build. Think about it this way, and after this talk, it will be more clear why I'm saying that. Think about it this way, that you are getting your application, whatever application you're running, that application someone else should be able to build end-to-end for another separate UI. And that's possible if you have the API as a product strategy. And when you are building these APIs, important thing is what methodology you want to use here. So if you consider the exposure APIs, so you have to start with the low-level APIs which you are building. But business will be building on top of those APIs. And I'll talk about few examples in Uber where all the other companies are building on top of it. So you get a good sense of how these business APIs are getting built. And user experiences are getting enhanced because of this reason. So what happens that you have with great power comes great responsibility. And we all know that that you have to make sure that APIs, you're building the APIs. Once you build it, you publish it, you have to maintain those APIs. Yes? So for that, Leonard, he talks about in his book, Restful Web APIs, and he recommends for certain methodology. And in my book, I'll be talking about some of these aspects also, plus a little bit more than what he's talking about. So that from the methodology perspective, first you have to understand the designing, how you are designing that API. So let's talk about this. There is a 7-step procedure to define, to understand how the APIs you need to work on. So this is a maze game. which we have here. You start from one side, and either you can go up, or you can go straight, and you can take a left turn or a right turn and come to the end. Yep. So this looks like a simple game, which we are trying to build now. Now, to build that particular game, you first find out what are the semantic descriptors which are available for that game. You know, maze can have a title, door will be there, there's exit which is there. Based on that exit, there is a switch position up and down, left and right, which we have got. Then you design some kind of a state diagram. Yep. We build a state diagram. We say that, okay, this cell needs to have a switch, and we can flip that model. Then what we do is that after we build this model, the next step is to define the relationships. Now, when I say relationships, what happens is that when our product owner comes in and say that, okay, build an API, what happens? We just start building the API. We need to look at, from the perspective of, like, I'm right now in the schema.org. So what you need to do is, if somebody is building an employee, what do? You come in here for employee, and let's look into employee schema.org. Employee can be a person or organization. And within a person, now you can have address and all the other affiliations. You can go to the address. So these are already been defined and not used by one domain, but 1 million domains are using this. You get where I'm coming to? Somebody has already researched out what are the different activities which are there. Like, for example, in this case, address, it's used by many domains. So when you build your REST API, and it has these coordinates. So let's talk about this for a second. When you want to create a microdata, this is the format for the microdata, if you want to prepare it. Now, we all are familiar with JSONLD. How many are using JSON objects? Yeah, everyone using JSON objects. So it's something not big circle there. But have we validated whatever we are building based on this person? That's the value which I'm trying to come up with. So go back to your current objects which are being defined and find out whether there is already defined area which you can reuse. Make sense? Yeah? So that's going to save you a lot of time, because if you want to do geo-coordinates, for example, how do you define the geo-coordinates? So it talks about how to define the geo-coordinate. What's the markup looks like? What the JSONLD looks like for geo-coordinates? Longitude, latitude. You would not need to now come up with these from the scratch. What else can you do? So same thing as a car.schema. Like if you have an auto dealer, you can go and 10,000 domains are using the same thing. Just like this, there is called doubling code also is there, where you can go in and find out for a given property, which property is useful. If that's the same property which you are trying to reuse. There is another something called micro formats. So micro formats means it's the same kind of thing where you want to find out, like, for a given domain, like, for example, social networking portability. If your application need to interface with social network, there is already a micro format available which you can reuse. Okay. All right, so here is what I was talking about. So let me go back and we'll revisit this in a second. So once you do that, you get the movie, you get the formats for you, then you go back to your design and modify your design based on these formats, i.e. an A format or micro formats, you define these things in, okay? And then you come up with your model. Now you can give this model to anybody, and they will be independently be able to design that REST API. And after you decide, like, hey, I need a collection of objects, so you define the collection of objects, and you can work through that object. And then define the profile. So profile is just defining what's the reference which you're trying to use for this one. That's the only thing you need to define here. And implementation, which can be sent to anybody. And publish at the end. So publishing is really key part of this, like where any API which you are building, you should publish it and be able to use it. So let me just show you. Yeah. So when you are building a particular platform, so this is, I'm talking about the API G. So it doesn't matter which API you're using, but when you're building a particular platform, you have partners you are dealing with, you have consumer applications, you have employee applications who are using it. Based on that, you are connecting with legacy application behind the scene or Internet of Things, which you're trying to do here. Now, what you need to do is the SDLC cycle for that one is you're going to build an application API, you create an open API, that's number one. Number two is you're going to test it, publish it, and put it in the production. When you put it in the production, you want to make sure that you auto-scale. So you're going to use the platforms which are available, like to auto-scale, the micro formats, you're going to use to really scale your application, like in this case. All right. So that says, so what should we be thinking about the architectural perspective? So this is good, but now we need to look at from architecture perspective, how you're going to build these applications, how the APIs will be built. So I'm going to take an example from Uber, and I'm going to look at from the API perspective for this one. So when they started building, this was a monolithic app for them. So this was like kind of their app where they had two trunks which were there. So they have back-end applications, and they had the front-end applications where a driver is going to pick you from one location and take you to another location. So how many here have used Uber? Pretty much everybody have used that. So what they did was the initial Uber was a monolithic app. When they converted that monolithic app, the important thing is that they came up with the blueprint for the Uber, where they are really looking for is what are the different methodology they have to go through. So let me just go through this in a second. Let me show you. Okay, so these are the tools they have got. Request a ride. So when they're building their application, they're building these REST APIs for requesting a ride, trip experience. How was your trip, and how you have experienced that particular trip. And drivers, you can register a particular driver. Anybody can become a driver. Uber driver. You have a car, you can become a driver. You can start using that application. And you can also have deliveries, like where are you delivering this particular app as a whole. So not only that, the important thing, the power comes is here. So when you look at Amazon Echo, so what they did was Amazon Echo came in and they interfaced with Uber because they have provided these APIs to them. Now Amazon Echo came in, and what they did, they put an extension on top of it. Say, I need an Uber. Just have to give a command. When, tell the time, and it will make sure that the Uber came along with you. Yeah. Same thing is true with the TripAdvisor. So when the TripAdvisor came in, you want to book a ticket. When you reach a particular airport, you want to make sure that you always have a car available for you. Yeah. What happens if there is a delay? What happens is that there was a delay in the flight got delayed by 1 day or 2 days. What will happen? TripAdvisor will take care of all those problems for you. So that's the beauty about this. So you think about your application, how you're going to make sure that your applications are more adaptable for other people to use. Not only that, you build the REST API so that wherever there is a failure point, so you have a failure point here, at the time when you're trying to ask for a pickup, someone can take a more time coming for that particular pickup. Let's say it's going to take half an hour to reach. The driver is going to take half an hour to reach. What if the driver has to wait for 1 hour for you to get out of that location? they're losing money from there. That's the point which the REST APIs are providing you. When we design our REST API so that all the failure points will become a REST API, so we can text message the person that, hey, driver is arriving, you should be ready, be out there, waiting for the driver to come up. So important thing is you ask these questions to yourself, like, what is the availability? 99.99% available. That means 5 minutes, only 5 minutes you have a downtime, which is pretty low as a whole. How much is the operation cost per trip? You want to reduce the operation cost as part of this trip. And what's the response time look like? Is it a 500 milliseconds response time for that particular application? Based on that, you build your REST APIs. And that's what is important. Now, somebody asked me a question just now that, how am I going to do that? How am I going to support 500 milliseconds of response time? The way you're going to do that is you have to find out what's the service limit is for your REST API which you're building. Sometimes what happens, we build a REST API for all the customers in the world. Instead of that, you build the REST API for a particular use case which you have got. So if you have a use case, you have to make sure that REST API is built for that use case. That means service limit with number of customers times the date range you are asking that. So let's say somebody is asking for n number of customers, let's say 20 customers, and they want it for 1 year. Maybe that's okay. But they're asking for 1,000 customers. Probably that's not a good thing. So you want to throw an error message saying that, hey, your service limit is reached, we cannot satisfy that. That's really useful because now what happens, the integration hub can kick in. The integration hub, iHub, can kick in, which can actually send the requests multiple times and gather the data and return the values for other users. Make sense? So that's the beauty about using it this way. And now you can build a lot of services on top of it using the same model as a whole. Twitter is the same thing. Like, Twitter went down like quite a few times. So what's the real problem is that the scalability challenge comes in. When you're scaling your application, this is a small app which has only, when the followers increases in this case, it's going to take more time to return that same value. So to do that, you have to build the application which is scalable. Now let's talk about orbits. How many here have used any airline service? You want the cheapest flight, yeah? So what do? You call that particular flight, and it's basically calling 20 different flights, operators, and then Jet Airways and other ones, and bringing back you the cheapest flight or the time frame which you are looking for. Yes? So what's really happening is that when they're returning the values, what if these values are stored in Oracle SQL Server database or Oracle database? It's going to take a long time to come to the customer, and some other airlines will take advantage of it. So what you need to do, you need to cache those. But you can't cache everything. So what you do is you build a Lambda architecture in which you have Cassandra as one of the available way of dealing with this, where you're building these applications so that which is more responsive. And other problem which comes in here is that you can have overbooking also, like United Airlines and other airlines, they may have overbooking also. That means that can you support ACID transactions using this? Yes, you can support ACID transactions, but the problem is that what to do in a case where you have overbooking? What do? You compensate. That's called compensation pattern. So you have to apply, in your business logic, you want to make sure that if you have a transaction, you want to make sure it's highly available transaction. 500 milliseconds transaction is there, but it has to retrieve fast. You can overbook also, but there should be a compensation pattern later on if you get overbooked. That's the way which the industry is going in. So because to satisfy this requirement. And yeah, so that's where. What about the cancellation? So if you have a cancellation somewhere else, then you have to compensate those people. It's not that you have to wait for the transaction to be received. You did the transaction in the database. It's different way of thinking, the same thing. Like you have to roll back. It's not roll back in the transaction. It's a compensation pattern you're trying to apply for this. So designing the APIs for scaling, this is really key part which is there. To do that, you have to make sure that if you have APIs which are dependent upon different other APIs, you have to group them. That's number one. Co-locate these APIs. And the other thing is to reduce the number of requests which is going through the traffic. So what happens in this case, in Netflix case, is that 2009, when they were sending the request, there were 9 requests being sent. At that time, they were not scalable. They had problems scaling. But what they did, they removed that chattiness by doing all the processing on the server side and then returning the values. That's the key part here, which you want to do. So I have seen 5, 6 applications fail because of the same reason. Application worked perfectly fine with 5 concurrent users. But application goes down in 50 concurrent users. Why they go down? Because most of the time you are very chatty. All the HTML applications are very chatty applications. You have to remove that. All those REST API problems. And we'll talk about few of the strategies you can use later on how to do that. And basically, you should be able to scale based on what is being asked for. So let's talk about one of the other thing with Kril video. So in Kril video, what happens is this is a site where you can watch videos, you can watch trailers, videos, or TV shows. Those are the 3 things you can do. So you have the conceptual model. You come up with the conceptual model. This is what my model looks like. Okay. In this case, a video features many actors. An actor appears in many videos. It's pretty simple. We all are very familiar in doing that. You have to understand what the purpose is, how the user is going to use it, how the user is going to use my comments, how they're going to use the videos. You have to find that purpose behind that particular value. And just like a jigsaw puzzle, you have to make sure those align together. And why is it really important? Anybody? Why is it really? This is the very critical thing. It's really important for you to know. Because you want performance of less than 500 milliseconds. Even if you have data of 1 million rows in the database. But now we are all moving towards big data. So you have a lot of data to work with. So that's the reason you need to do that. And we all know about this. We all take pride in writing APIs like this. If I ask you a question, who's using your API at this time? Do we have an answer? We don't know who all are using it. How they're using it also you don't know. And how it's going to perform also you have no idea how it's going to perform. I also, my monolithic app, I have no idea how it's been used. I'm very afraid to change even a single method there. So what I do, I create a new method. Is that the new strategy? Like that's the only strategy we got? And if I need to add a field, add an optional field to it. Yeah? All those things we are trying to come around to solve this particular problem. How about this? How does this look like? If you have an API like this, I know exactly how much it's going to perform this particular API. And this is the purpose of that API. How about that? That's the key of designing that particular API in a way which is more usable for you. So what it means, you come up with these relationships. You find out what your domain model looks like. We are pro at it. This is third normal form, ingrained in our brain. Third normal forms, yes? We are being taught what is third normal form. At least I was like, when I was studying, that was the most important thing I need to know for interview. But is that going to scale? Not really, not anymore. So what's happening is that depending upon the application flow, which you are going to find out now, we're going to find out that user first logs on to the site, then the first thing they do is that they find out the most recently used videos, they find out their most important videos which are there. So Netflix does the same thing. They have everything cached ready for us. They have tables ready for us because they perform. They have personalized service also for this one. And we find out those application flow. Based on the application flow, then we find out the mapping rules. We apply the mapping rules based on ERD plus application flow and come up with a logical diagram. So if you see this diagram, I have user by email, video by user, comments by user. You may say that, hey, I'm duplicating some of these, data. Is that a good thing to duplicate data? Yes. In today's world, it's yes. This is the right thing to do in today's world. Yes, 5 years ago, I would have said the different answer for this. And after 5 years from now, I'll have a different answer for that, same thing. So, but for now, this is the answer, which is yes. So you come up with this Chebertko diagram. They call it Chebertko diagram. It came from data stacks. You can read about it in more detail. And duplicate data is perfectly fine because you are making sure that even if you have terabytes of data, you are performing. You would not fail, and you will be able to get the data out. Now let's talk about some RESTful APIs as a whole, like what are the different other attributes of APIs are. In my slide deck, I will have extra section, okay, which I'll have the design principles, like some of the ones which we all know and heard by heart, but I'll discuss some of them which are key for performance. So what's really important thing here is data-centric modeling. I talked about the data-centric modeling just now, okay, where you're looking at the data, how it should perform well. Then what we are looking for is the URL need to be readable. You should have a readable URL. You shouldn't have get the details. A noun should be there for a given URL and use it that way. We all know that. You need to have good error handling. Not only you need to have good error handling, you should have a web link for every error message where you can click and user can take actionable step on top of it. So those things are also good to have. And nowadays the relationships are also coming in. Relational links are coming in. I'll talk about it in a second. So entity tags. So that's the first thing which you can use. Now, how often your data changes? That's very important for you to know. Does the data change every 5 minutes? Probably not. So you have to find out what your use case is. Based on that, you can create entity tags. How many here use entity tags? ETags in your. So if you want to increase performance, you can use entity tags here. So let me just go over it for a second. Okay, so what I am having is that I got a client browser which I'm making a request, and then I have a local browser cache is there. What you can do is you can add the ETag to it, and then it will perform better for you. So let me just go over that in a second. So in the first one, what I'm doing is I'm going to a site. And in this site, I'm going to get the response back. So this one is always 580 milliseconds. Second time I ran, it's also still 227 milliseconds, which is there. Now, if I put an ETag in place, in that case, if I run this thing out, if I run this out, it's going to take 230 milliseconds. And next time you run it, because it's already cached, it's not getting the data from the database. So if I do this, just a second. So if you see this here, so keep alive is there, not modified. Because it's not modified, you are able to get the data really fast. So that's one way of making it fast retrieval. You can also cache the data. You can cache it for some time. You can say, hey, after some time, this is the get which I get. But the second time when you run it, don't get the same data back again, which is pretty good. Okay? So that's the ETag, and I'll ask you to look at it in more detail. It's pretty good, easy way of increasing your performance. This is what I was just talking about. So another thing you can do is you can put the pagination to the return of the collection. Instead of getting all of the values, you say that I want the 10 items, offset of 10, after 10, give me 5. So if you have a lot of data is getting returned, you want to limit that data out so it doesn't return everything. And they'll help in service limits also. So what else can you do? You can add your own filtering. I mean, this is just some of the filtering which I have here, where clause, you can add your own where clause, where from this date to this date, count, and by creation of the time, you can add some of your own metadata. Now, a lot of the companies are creating their own metadata to get the data from Cassandra and other places, because then the query is faster, because they already know how they are getting the JSON object from. And this is just an example of filtering where you are saying the where clause. I mean, you can create your own where clause like this. Yeah, this is the pagination example. Another one is partial items. Partial item is really cool because what happens that if you have an order object, an order object can have like 100 attributes to it. Orders can have suppliers. What are the suppliers which are associated with, what's the price associated with this? So what you can do, if you're only interested in the total amount object from the order, how you can get that? You say only I'm interested in that object. So that way your API will perform better. Yes? Because you're not spending time in going to the database and getting the values, because that's the way we are always doing this. This is going to give you a biggest bang for the buck. Because we started using it, it's really helpful because if the customer don't want it, we don't return the values. That's the whole idea behind it. So in this particular example, if you see, this is an API, this is a Google API. I got a demo, and I got all these attributes there. So instead of these attributes, I'm only interested in fields, and these are the 3 fields which I'm interested in. I only get these 3 fields back. So I do it at the field level, but what we have done in our company also is that we have done at the object level also. So you can do it at the field level and also say create Boolean values for different objects and return those values out. So that way you can also get real good performance boost for yourself. So basically what you're trying to do, you're not surprising your users, and then you're following some of the available patterns which are given to you. Now let's talk about versioning. So versioning, I mean, you have major, minor, and patch version. We're all dealing with the versioning mechanisms which are available. And why the versioning is important, because when you build an API, it's not a simple way you just build it and you have to live with it for 5 years, 10 years, or maybe more. So and the requirements will change. Product owner will come back and say, hey, can you add this more functionality to your existing API? How are you going to deal with that? That's the key part which you need to ask yourself. So important thing is thou shall not break the customers. Existing customers, they should perform well. And that is the key problem. Like a lot of companies, they face the same problem. So some of the examples are URI Path is one of the examples. So there are 4 different types of versioning mechanisms which are available, which you can use. You can use any one of them depending upon which stage of the project you are in. If you are an older project and you have already chosen some technologies which are using URI Path. So URI Path is like, for example, within the path itself, you have a versioning mechanism. Here, 1.1 is part of the tweet itself. Twitter uses this. Altacian is also the same thing. You put a 1 version here. And it's kind of a simple way of dealing with it. 2006, 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframe, all the companies which came in, they were all using this way. So I mean, there was no choice. That was the best method to use. So, but if somebody asks me, like Diggy and other ones, but it has a drawback because now, and I'll talk about the drawback in 5 minutes, but you get an idea. It's a simple way to deal with it, but if the version changes, what do you need to do? Anybody need to do? Client needs to change. That's a pain. Yep. So that's the lots and lots of client changes. That's where the problem is with this one. So I would not recommend, if you're starting fresh, I would not go there. Another one is the versioning in the URI parameter itself. Now, I'm saying here Netflix, and I'm saying version 1.5. What if I don't supply that version? It will use the latest one. It will use the latest one. So Google does that, by the way. Like, Google has a way of like, hey, if you're getting search engine requests, they're always using the REST API, and they keep on adding new parameters. If you can do that, if it's a stable API, that's fine. I think this is something which you may want to look at. But you may surprise, if you think about it, it's a little work, but they can be surprised for the customers. Moving, that's the con here. Now, if you consider this case, now I'm building this hypermedia control. Now, this is the hypermedia control I'm building here, where I have a link, and when I'm going to buy by the way, you might also like to visit your friends. In this case, in case of any of the online site, they will say you may also like these products. Yep, that's what we say here. What happens if there is a new version coming out? What do you need to do? You need to change the code, put in the V2 here, because the version 2 for the user has come in. What if there is another version which comes out? That doesn't look good. So you don't want to do this as part of your development. You would want to avoid this kind of linking. So that's where content negotiation came in. GitHub used to use that earlier model. They changed to content negotiation. So that's the way where the only change is in the header. There's no other place the change is. So in this case, my apps version 3 is being supported. So anyone using version 2 will keep on using version 2. You just change the header. Now, who has more work here? No, client don't have any work. So only thing is that, yeah, you can, is there, but newer client make the call. So in this situation, if the old client is calling, you only get Neil Armstrong. But if the new client is calling, they're getting last name and salutation also, which is pretty good. Like, that's the right thing to do. But advantage here is that now when the older client is ready to move to the new client, they just have to, what do they need to do? Huh? Only change the header, nothing else. Nothing else getting changed here. There is no code change. That's the beauty about this one. So that I recommend this one as part of using it. Of course, it has some level of complexity is there, but that's fine. Like, we are developers, we love complexity. So we should be fine with that. Another one is custom header, where you're putting as part of the header itself, you are saying that my version is this version, or you're going to say that my version is this version as of this date. So you say that, okay, my version is as of this date, this version is available. If there's a newer version comes out for a different date, client just have to change that version, similar to the content header. So if somebody asks me a question, which one to choose, I would go with the last two options from this, because they are more the way the industry is moving right now. So, but the important thing is must version. That's the important thing. We have to make sure. Next is API security. Now, API security is a key part, because security came in, again, back to circle. Important thing is that you are not alone. You have injection threads, cross-site scripting and forging is there. So all these input validations is really key. For any API, you have to sanitize the input. Okay? You have to sanitize the input, only then you take that input. And same thing is, you have to sanitize the output. Any output going out, any input coming in for any field, you have to sanitize that particular field. And of course, for security, you want to make sure that when you are doing any transformation, all these phases You want to make sure that your KPMG lifecycle, you want to make sure that the data is secure as a whole. So there are many ways to do that. So let me go over a few of them. Yeah, before I go there, I mean, I don't want to miss this. So JSONLD, how many here are using JSONLD? JSON. Yeah, JSON we are using. But JSONLD is pretty popular nowadays because now what's happening is that you might be interested in, this is kind of upsell to your application, where you're building a REST APIs, where you're giving links to other attributes you might be interested in. And that's very useful, for you to really look at. So I will recommend you to look at that. These are the error codes. So this is a Twilio site. And the error code will return like what error code is there. So this link is part of the error code itself. So with that link, you come to this particular error code. You can dive into it and find out exactly what that error is. So another thing is Hydra, which also you can use for your particular application. If you're building an application. If I have time, I'll spend a little bit more time here. Hydra is a language which uses JSONLD, and build on top of it. You can invoke different functions on top. Just for the testing purpose, you can use this as a way of finding out the values. So for example, if I want to find out the events, I can say get, and then this event will be used, and you can invoke that particular event at the end. And you can find out what are the different, get all the events for that particular collection. You can do that. Okay, we talked about this. API. Okay, so yeah, this is the OpenAuth, like OAuth 2. Like I think we are all familiar with OAuth 2. Yeah, here, pretty much like you authorize, and you say that I authorize all my connections and my friends and my locker room password and stuff. When you say yes. And that's exactly what happens when you download an app. we don't ever read the fine prints, and you get the token. So you get the access code back, make an access token request, and then you can request that thing, and all the friends are listed. So this is kind of like going to Google and getting your friends' details, and and you're trusting that particular site to do the right thing. So that's what this is trying to say here. This is Swagger documentation. I think we are all familiar with Swagger. Yep, all using it. Yeah. So I mean, I would recommend you start using Swagger. It's going to help in your application as a whole. Now another thing is JWT. JWT is JSON Web Token. So that's the important format which is there, and this is a lightweight way of connecting. So for example, what it does is that you are generating an encoded token. Based on that token, you're verifying for every request which is going in. This is a lightweight connection. The advantage there is that it's pretty easy to to use for any REST API endpoints, and you can do authentication also. Authentication and authorization, both you can do with this. So let me try to explain this in a second. So what I'm saying is, let me just check one thing first. Okay. So let me go to the STS. So STS, I think you must be familiar with an Eclipse tool. So this is just another Eclipse tool which is available. So this is a API, response which is available to me. I'm creating a person REST API, this REST service I'm creating, and I'm adding few persons to it. And based on that person, I have some of the methods for REST API methods I'm trying to call. The important thing here is that with this particular REST API, when I'm trying to call that REST API, there is something called web security. So we are all familiar with the Spring Boot security. Yeah. Few people are. So this is available. This is a GitHub project, which is also there in my slides, so you can actually go through it yourself and try it out. Once you enable the security, the only thing you need to do is to add the filter for the authentication token, JWT authentication token. And for all practical purposes, you can, so if I go here, so Zershan, so he worked on this particular project. You can pretty much copy the security part of it. Okay. After you do that, pretty much what you get is authentication and authorization both. So let me go over that in a second. So let me run the Spring Boot app right now. It's running. So this is the Spring JWT which I'm talking about. So what it's doing is that I'm going to be logged in, and then I'll have choices of what are the different user authentications which are available to me. So localhost. Let me do that here. Okay, so I can first log out. So I can have an admin login, or I can have a login with a user. So this is actual user. Password. When I log in, I can call the service with an example service, which is returning me the values. But I can also, are you guys able to see? But if I do any admin function, you get 403. Which is good. So it's saying that, hey, you're not authorized to really run through. So this is authorization role as a user only. But if I do disabled, nobody will be able to, log into this one. You get the disabled password, which is pretty good. So that's pretty cool. So I mean, we did talk about some of the security things which are available. And then another thing you can do is that you can do threat modeling. So threat modeling is really cool way of connecting because you are calling web services. So you have to create a threat model for your REST APIs and basically find out if there is any risk behind them. So for example, let me show in this particular example where my web application is calling my trading application. So in this case, so what I can do is I can find out what are the potential problems which could be there. So in this case, tampering of data can be done. That's number one. Input validation needs to be done. Elevation of privilege can be done. CSRF can be done. So my suggestion is that you can download a tool which comes with Microsoft. This is the only reason, one of the tools which I like, I use, Windows also along with that, which is good way of doing threat modeling, where you come up with your own application, where you find out how user is interacting with it. Not only that, internally, how are you calling different applications? You can find out if there is any hole, and then work through with that one. Okay. Yeah, so we did think through quite a few things. So now I'm going to dive into some of the interesting other things which are there. Gardner came up with the customer-driven API design, where you're looking at from the persona perspective, how this persona is going to use my application. What would be my response time looks like, availability looks like, and depending upon that, customer creates customer contracts. Okay, based on the contracts, then you write the REST APIs design for creating packed files. And that's the testing model, which is actually coming up in the industry as a good way of connecting. So what's really happening? A provider provides the conversation saying that, hey, customer asks, hey, what are your expectations? How are you going to use my software? They give the expectation back to the contract. Now, the provider will be able to use those contracts and create a micro test. Okay? And that's the key part. You're creating a micro test, so now you can call that particular web service later on. So what it means, that when I'm calling a get stocks and stock levels, I'm going to create a packed file and basically provide that packed file from the customer to the stock server. And now anytime I change a new method, or if I'm modifying the same method, I just run that packed file. So when I'm running that packed file, it's guaranteeing that my contracts are still valid. That's the good thing about it. How many here have used this? Okay. So I would recommend you to use this one. Let me just show you. So I'm going to show you customer, so consumer and the provider. So the provider, what the consumer is going to do is consumer, when we are calling that particular method, this is the application. This is the application which is calling that particular foo method, and this is calling the REST API from here. But what it's doing is it's creating a packed file. Application test, which are there, and the target provider is going to run those packed files. So let me just show you how it will actually do this one, and then it will be easier for you to understand what's going on. So this is my application which I'm calling, and it's returning foo 100. This is the object which I'm creating and returning that object. Okay, so let's just run that app. So I'm going to run the provider app. So right now my application is running. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to run the micro test, which is going to go in and verify if all my contracts are being maintained or not. So I'll have you go through this in more detail to understand like what's going on with this one. Okay. Now let's go over another thing you can use is REST assured. How many here have used REST assured? It's pretty good. I mean, I recommend you guys using that because it's just like a JUnit test, and then developers' responsibility will be to always maintain those JUnit tests. It's kind of like, it's running on actual application server. That's the only difference which is there. So another aspect, another question which is there, that you can also use graph APIs. So graph APIs means that why our other APIs are not good? Why do we need to use graph APIs? I mean, you can ask that question. Because a lot of our connections are, it's like hierarchical levels are there. And then when you know some person, the other person knows some other person. So there is a network of all these guides are there. So how do you do a query which is retrieving it faster? For that, you need to use graph APIs. I mean, if I have time, I can show you in a little bit detail what it is. Twitter uses the graph APIs. Facebook uses the graph APIs. So you might also have, so anything social you're doing, you have to use graph APIs. I mean, without that, you can't run that API faster. fast enough. You can also create something like this where you have a CRM sales where account manager is within a company, and that company has an employee. Employee works for this particular company. So this hierarchy also you can create for your own CRM. And that hierarchy you can query based on that particular hierarchy, which is really good. I would recommend you to also look at Facebook Graph API, which is also becoming very popular with time in this case. Okay, and when you do the development, I mean, of course, this is the SDLC life cycle. Development, anywhere we do it, we have to make sure we do the testing all along. Like when we are doing it, the important thing is when you're doing the performance testing, you have to do a ramp-up testing. So when I say ramp-up testing, that means that you test it with 10 concurrent user, then increase it to 20 concurrent user and 50 concurrent user, and then find out what is your service limit looks like. Because you have to make sure that response time is less than 500 milliseconds, yes? So you have to make sure what's your service limit is. Based on that, you have to do performance tests to really find out what that limit looks like for you. Now, important thing here is that when you're looking at a particular API, there are two ways of developing APIs. Yep. So number one way of developing API is when you have a big system. Now, this is the monolithic app, by the way. This is the way we have developed it. Like, you have a big system here, you expose the object in the XML. Is that the way we are doing it right now? Yes? We got to change that. Because if we do it this way, then it's not sustainable model to have. Then we come up with standards committee. We have a bunch of architects who sit together for like a couple of months, and then they came up with something, which is a little better, like where you have a big system which exposes some of the XML APIs using the standards. But what's missing in this also? Anyone? There are some common things which we do for all these APIs, which we can do in a common place. And another thing which is missing is the design part, which we talked about before. We said that we look at from the ideal design, how the design should look like, and then work on that particular design. Of course, you can do a copycat. You can say your competitor has done something, you're doing something similar to that. That's something also you can do here. But the good thing about the API facade is you come up with the ideal design, how the application will be used. Come up with that design first. And based on that design, later on, within this API facade, it might be still calling the same functions. Same monolithic app is there. Behind the scene is still the same app which is there. So that doesn't have any problem. But what you're trying to do is you find out what the ideal design is, you find out what your data stuff looks like, and mediate all these parameters. So mediate means all the security, all the logging and other things can be put it into this particular format. So you have ideal design, and then you have an API facade based on it. Now, the advantage here is that if you have a monolithic app, now you can change one at a time. Okay, let's change only the portions which are transactional portions, which are critical to our industry. And later on, when you get time, you change the other ones. But from the user's perspective, it's still using the ideal design. Proxy can be different. Proxy can call the old component still, and that shouldn't be any problem. Okay, so let me just now go over quickly. Oh, I got like 3 more minutes. So let's see here. Yeah, so we talked about, so this is the Maven also there. Maven is also a Git repo. You can use from that one. So this is the Twitter app. I think might not have time for this. All right, so I think with that, I conclude saying that, hey, we did discuss quite a few things. So this was just to give you a design overview of what it is. There are other things also which are important for you, but you have to make sure that you look for the right patterns which you want to develop with. So I hope you really enjoyed this session. Now I'm open for any questions for you guys. 1 or 2 questions. Any questions? All right, so I'll be available after this session. So if you have any question, please come by. Thank you.